Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a fascinating global mystery. Governments worldwide spend absolutely billions of dollars trying to physically replicate Silicon Valley, and they almost always fail spectacularly. From Europe to Asia, politicians draw borders around a city, they build these pristine research parks, offer sweeping tax incentives, and they genuinely expect that if they just build the physical vessel, the magic of tech innovation is just going to automatically pour in. But time and time again, these massive, well-funded initiatives just fall flat.
So we really have to ask ourselves, why do these billion-dollar government tech hubs fail so consistently? Well, they fail because they rely on a deeply flawed premise. It's a geographic fallacy. They treat innovation like it's a product of geography, assuming that if you just build state-of-the-art labs and write up some tax break legislation, you'll automatically spark a technological revolution. Essentially, they're looking at the shadow, not the engine. The crucial point to understand here is that Silicon Valley isn't a zip code. It's not a highway sign on Route 101 or some shiny glass building in Cupertino. It's actually an invisible, highly volatile psychological and economic matrix. You literally cannot map it with GPS coordinates. Instead, this ecosystem is built on three deeply interconnected, completely non-physical pillars. To really wrap our heads around this phenomenon, we have to look at what we call the triadic force field. This structural matrix is made up of three things: academic radicalism, specialized high-risk capital, and a cultural tolerance for total failure. It operates like a finely tuned engine. Extract even a single one of these three pillars and the entire system completely collapses. Take just one away, and the psychological audacity required to imagine the impossible simply evaporates. So let's start with Pillar 1, academic radicalism. Let's dive into this first pillar and see how a single university completely rewired the whole concept of higher education. The story begins with a stark contrast at Stanford University. You see, for centuries, traditional academia, especially the elite East Coast ivory tower, functioned by shielding the intellect from the quote-unquote corrupting influence of commerce. Professors basically pursued pure theory behind strict brick walls. But the Stanford blueprint completely shattered that barrier. During the mid-20th century, Stanford's Dean of Engineering, Frederick Terman, noticed this massive brain drain of his best students heading off to safe corporate jobs back east. So Terman aggressively pushed his brilliant minds, guys like young Bill Hewitt and Dave Packard, to stay west and build their own empires. He wanted them to actively monetize their intellect. And Terman didn't just give advice. He structurally changed the game. By leasing university land to tech companies to create the Stanford Industrial Park back in 1951, he literally put corporate labs right across the street from lecture halls. Then, through the Honors Cooperative Program, he let corporate engineers take graduate classes part-time. This was huge because it allowed cash-poor startups to out-hire massive monopolies just by offering elite education as a job benefit. Basically, Terman established a core rule of the ecosystem. Pure intellect is fundamentally incomplete until it is weaponized into a commercial enterprise.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, specialized high-risk capital.
Let's see how this builds, because those abstract academic ideas we just talked about, they're functionally inert without an injection of highly specialized money. Deep technology requires immense upfront funding long before it ever generates a single dollar of revenue. Now, if an entrepreneur went to traditional Wall Street back then, underwriters demanded physical collateral, real estate or machinery they could seize if things went south. But a software developer doesn't have a factory. Their entire corporate value is just an abstract hypothesis inside their brain. To traditional finance, funding that without collateral was absolute insanity. And this chasm is exactly what forced the creation of a completely new asset class along Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park: venture capital.
80%. That number is staggering, but this new limited partnership venture model was mathematically revolutionary. Why? Because it explicitly and structurally assumed that 80% of its investments would go completely bankrupt. They flipped traditional finance totally on its head. They projected that the surviving 10 to 20% of companies would achieve such an astronomical global scale that those returns would easily cover the write-offs of the entire fund 100 times over. Sand Hill Road succeeded because these guys weren't just passive ATMs spitting out cash. They acted as operational midwives. Imagine a 21-year-old college dropout inventing a paradigm-shifting technology. They don't know anything about global supply chains or corporate law. The VCs stepped directly into this vacuum. They structured boards of directors, recruited veteran corporate CEOs, hired specialized IP lawyers, and systematically prepared these raw, chaotic startups for massive Wall Street IPOs.
Basically, they handed founders a world-class advisory network literally over a single weekend. And that brings us to Pillar 3, unstigmatized failure. This is perhaps the most fascinating pillar, because without this psychological foundation, neither the engineers nor the financiers would have the audacity to take the terrifying leaps that real disruption demands. In traditional corporate cultures, whether that's the American Rust Belt, Tokyo, or Western Europe, bankruptcy ruins your career. You're instantly locked out of capital markets. But Silicon Valley operates under an entirely reversed cultural framework. In the vocabulary of the Valley, a destroyed startup isn't a disaster. It's recontextualized as an expensive education or a temporary pivot. Failure isn't a permanent black mark, it's actually a vital, mandatory badge of experience. This ensures intellectual capital is continuously recycled. First, a startup goes bankrupt. Second, the founder walks away with an unstigmatized resume. Third, they secure new VC funding. Wait, really? Yes, because venture capitalists are actually more likely to fund a founder on their second or third attempt. Think about it. That founder just learned exactly how not to run a company, and they learned it using someone else's money. That experience is extracted and directly recycled back into the system. So where does this mindset actually come from? Well, this exceptional tolerance for risk traces straight back to the DNA of the 1848 California gold rush. It was a transient, high-risk mining culture where a prospector could dig a dry hole for months, move over one ridge, and strike gold the very next day. This comfort with spectacular reversals of fortune was permanently codified in 1957 when the traitorous eight successfully rebelled against toxic management at Shockley Semiconductor to invent the silicon microchip. In any other city in the 1950s, corporate desertion would ruin your career. In the Bay Area, it launched Fairchild Semiconductor and proved that rebellion against established authority is actually the ultimate driver of tech progress. Now let's look at the iterative chain reaction. When we synthesize all these pillars, we can see how this crucible operates as a multi-generational chain reaction that never, ever resets. The ecosystem just leverages the accumulated capital and engineering talent of the previous era to launch the next disruption. The infrastructure from 1900s radio and vacuum tubes funded the silicon microchips of the 1950s. The wealth generated by those microchip kings directly funded the personal computers of the 70s, which paved the way for the 90s internet explosion, the mobile web of the 2000s, and straight into our modern era of generative AI. The intellectual capital is never lost. It literally just speeds up. Today's AI wave serves as the ultimate proof of this thesis. We're seeing a dramatic geographic realignment. The epicenter of innovation is actively shifting away from those suburban tech parks down south, directly into the dense urban brick warehouses of San Francisco proper, neighborhoods now nicknamed Cerebral Valley or Area 27. Foundational labs like OpenAI and Anthropic don't need massive manufacturing plants, they just require dense, walkable, urban intellectual cross-pollination and a laptop. Yet what's so brilliant here is that the historic loop remains fully intact. The algorithmic software minds up in San Francisco rely entirely on the massive physical hardware engines, specifically NVIDIA GPUs that are designed down in the South Bay of Santa Clara. So the South Bay manufactures the foundational physical engines, while San Francisco serves as the hyperdense port city, leveraging those engines to completely rewrite modern automation. The whole system is perfectly interlocked. Which brings us to our conclusion, the non-spatial truth. What you should really take away from this explainer is the absolute futility of copying physical architecture in an attempt to manufacture innovation. Silicon Valley is a shared, hyper-focused state of mind, not a place on a map. You simply cannot build it with bricks, mortar, or tax subsidies alone. If an international delegation leaves California with only urban planning maps, they are doomed to fail. If you fail to replicate the academic radicalism of the university pipeline, the aggressive venture capital, and the deeply embedded cultural celebration of unstigmatized failure, well, your expensive new tech park will remain nothing but a beautifully designed, incredibly empty monument. To leave you with a final thought, ask yourself this. If the world's most dominant economic engine is actually an invisible psychological crucible, how might we rethink the way we build the future in our own backyards? What incredible human potential are we burying by obsessing over physical borders in corporate real estate rather than cultivating the audacity to fail? Thank you for exploring this fascinating dynamic with me today. Keep asking the big questions.